All right, Michael Yon is here for the first time, but Michael, I hope this becomes a regular event for you coming on the channel and talking about what you're doing, because you are covering migrants right now in Panama and have had some wild experiences. I think somebody told me about you and your work because you're, first off, embedded, unlike many journalists or the majority of journalists. And so you're just seeing things in a way that those of us who are just like regurgitating wires or in studios in New York talking about immigration are just not seeing firsthand. And so that's why I thought it was really valuable to hear from you. But maybe you could just tell people first who you are, your background, and how you got into this line of work.
Sure. Great to come on, by the way. A lot of my family and friends who saw us coming on, I know they're going to be watching. Uh, and Anyway, I grew up in Florida, so I'm like the original Florida man, bad guy, right? I mean, I grew up catching alligators and girls and all that sort of stuff. And then I went off to the Army and became a Green Beret at a pretty young age. And when I went in, Reagan had become president, and he was beefing up special operations forces and intelligence and all that. And I made it through selection on the first go, actually. Went to language school, then went off, got on a couple of A teams, and then later as a Green Beret. And then later I went off, got out of the Army, which I love special forces, but the Army is too slow for me. But special forces was just right. So then I went off and went to school and worked for Michael Jackson for a while. Actually did security at his home, and then I ended up being started a business in Poland. And then later I became a war correspondent, right? And so I became a war correspondent after a couple of my friends were killed in Iraq. Actually, one was a Navy SEAL, Scott Helvenston, and he was killed in Fallujah with the contractors. I went to high school with Scott. We used to work out together. In fact, he was the youngest Navy SEAL ever. And then another one of my Green Beret friends was killed the next day. So that was why I went to Iraq in 2004. And then within maybe 4 months, I had picked up millions of readers because I was totally doing it on my own. I had no sponsorship whatsoever. I just had a lot of kind of global experience doing this and that. And, and so the next thing you know, Bruce Willis was knocking on the door, wanted to make a movie about what I was doing. I never finished the book because I ended up just stayed in combat. So I went to, according to the New York Times and the U.S. Army, I did more combat embedded than anybody. And I think that's true by a factor of about 10. So then I left Iraq and Afghanistan, did, between 2004 and 2011, I was mostly in those places. Philippines, covered a little bit down there, Thailand, Hong Kong, goes on, Nepal for a year. So I've got that kind of experience. And now of course, I got kicked out of Hong Kong by the communists last year. And then the pandemic hit. So I made the best of the pandemic. I must have read 100 books. I mean, I was kind of hoping for another pandemic because there's a lot of books I want to catch up on. I'm jokingly saying that as a war correspondent would. But then, I came back to the United States in September of 2020, and I had been gone for most of the last 20 years. I'd barely stepped foot in America for most of the last 20 years or so. In fact, I've spent more than half of my life in other countries. Right? More than half, not half of my adult life, but more than half of my life. And a lot of that's third world countries. So I'm quite comfortable in operating with tribes and jungles and deserts and that sort of thing. And so when I saw that the United States was getting in trouble last year, so I flew back in 2020 to Portland, naturally, because Portland I see is a nexus of trouble. And covered Antifa BLM there for a while, acting like they are on the streets, up all around Oregon and Washington State, and finally this thing and the other down in Atlanta covering Antifa BLM and Philadelphia and many other places. So and finally I was at the Capitol for I don't know, 6 weeks or so, maybe 2 months, off and on. Got invited into the White House, had a good time there, and did various other things. Was at the Capitol attack, did not go inside because I sensed trouble, but I was right outside. In fact, I briefed Giuliani for a couple of days after that. And as soon as the inauguration happened, I flew straight to the border in Texas. And so at El Paso, and I went into, covered, looked what was happening there. There was an immediate increase on the immigration. Customs and Border Patrol said it was 300 or 400%. I didn't have a baseline, but I definitely see a lot of people crossing. You didn't have to wait like 2 hours. You could see them, every 20 or 30 minutes, people were crossing. I'm sorry, I'm in Panama, so there's flies around here. So anyway, I've got the door open. As you know, I had the door open to try to do this outside earlier. But and so I went to New Mexico and Mexico and Arizona and Texas and all that. And finally, I was down here in Colombia and Panama. Many of the migrants who were crossing up, that photo of the jungle was just Saturday. Those airplanes
Right here.
we rented that airplane Saturday, and went down to. That's the Darien Gap right there. That's the ultimate jungle right there, and the mountains in the distance are. Well, I'll tell you about the Darien Gap. But anyway, so many of the most intense migrants that are coming through, they're not coming through the northern triangle, as it's called. For instance, Mexico, Guatemala, and El Salvador, that area. They're actually coming. I mean, that's where most come from. A lot of the intense ones, for instance, the Iranians and Yemenis, Afghans, Bangladeshis I meet all the time. Those guys are coming through the Darien Gap, because they're extracontinental migrants. They can't get into a closer approach, many of them. They can't get into Mexico to start from there. So they can fly without visa to Ecuador and Brazil. They can also go to Suriname, but there's not many flights there. And so they will fly usually to Ecuador or Brazil. And then from there, they just take a bus. And if you remember how South America is, both of those countries, Ecuador and Brazil, are contiguous with Colombia. And Colombia is the northernmost country in South America. And Colombia joins Panama at the Darien Isthmus, also called the Panama Isthmus. So an isthmus is shaped as isthmuses are always shaped, like an isthmus. So it's a spit of land. And in that Darien Gap, as it's called, there is the Pan American Highway, which runs the system of highways, which runs from Alaska all the way to Tierra del Fuego at the tip of South America. You can drive from Alaska to the tip of South America, but there's a gap right here. And it's called the Darien Gap, and it's about 66 miles of no road, right? And so there's 66 miles of highly intense jungle. It's some of the hardest jungle in the world. And I've been in a lot of jungles. It's just something about it. I mean, it's biologically ultra active, even for jungles. Yellow fever is endemic. I mean, we use this, as the United States uses this, for instance, as a screwworm buffer. If you know what screwworms are that kill cattle and stuff, we dump billions of screwworm flies over this jungle to keep screwworm from infesting our cattle and sheep and people in America, in the United States. So I mean, this is a very, very interesting piece of land, the Darien Gap. And so the migrants, when they come up through Colombia, they will go through two different places mostly, which is Turbo and Copergana. About 3.5 months ago, we flew down to Copergana. We flew to Colombia and met with a senator down there and some others, and we finally ended up in the Colombian side of the Darien Gap, following migrants in. We didn't go in very far. We only went in for about an hour, and the coyotes were very threatening. We then pulled out and flew to the Panama side to intercept them. That was about 3 months ago, and we've been here ever since, intercepting tons of migrants. Right now I'm in Panama City, actually. I'm out of the Gap. I was in the jungle last weekend with a couple congressmen. And so when we've been getting incredible intelligence, let's say, on what's happening in the Gap. That's why we just rented that airplane. We flew to a very remote village called Puerto Obaldia. It's on the Colombian-Panama border on the Caribbean side. You can barely find it on Google Earth. There's a remote airstrip out there. They just got electricity in that village 3 years ago, just got cell phone coverage. And so that's where we were at this last weekend, a few days ago. Today's Monday. We were there Saturday. So, yeah, that's somebody's foot. I
was going to just bring that up because I have a bunch of photos and videos I was just going through to try to find something. So this is somebody who went through the Gap, right? And this just, that's
normal.
Clearly,
in fact,
this is normal.
That's absolutely normal if they survive. I'm going to guess that about 10% die. And I'm basing that guess on this. And it's a guess because nobody knows how many actually go in. because we don't know how many go in on the Colombian side, and we don't know how many come out on the Panamanian side, and there's reasons for that. If you hear loud noise, it's because I'm in Panama City, and that's what Panama City is. And so I love the bird sounds more in the jungle. But so the people that go into the gap, and this month I've seen a report that more than 5,000 came out last month. I will say that is wrong based on our own observations. I'm going to say it's more like 10,000, and I have specific reasons that I can back that up with. But let's talk about the death toll. If 10,000 go through, I think about 1,000 are dying out there, and others think it's more. But we don't know how many go in. We don't know how many go out, but we can interview tons of people, right? So I've interviewed tons of people, as have my partners, Misako Ganaha and Chuck Colton. And Misako Ganaha is a famous journalist in Japan, and Chuck is a war correspondent like me. And so we've been tag teaming this thing. And so we've interviewed just tons of people. And for instance, one group of 20 Senegalese went in. That's a Marine on the right there, by the way, and a former Marine, and who was out there with us. And that's Tom Tiffany right over his left shoulder. He was a congressman. And so what happened was, and there's Masako in that orange hat, the famous Japanese journalist. And so what happened, this is a village called Bajo Chiquito. Bajo Chiquito.
And this is the guy whose feet out. This is the guy whose feet I was just showing, right?
That's right. So that's the guy. He's a Cuban. So we were sitting there at this store. This is the first village they come to after anywhere from 6 days to one guy was just lost out there for 22, but he survived. He came in a couple of days before this. He was out there for 22 days without food. So this guy came in. We didn't know. We don't know his story except somebody was carrying him in on his back, and he set him down right beside us in this village called Bajo Chiquito. Bajo Chiquito village is the first village that you come to after you've left Colombia like a week ago, and after those 10% are dead or so. That's where you come here. This is literally the first concrete right here. This is the first concrete you're going to step on since the last week or 2 weeks, depending on how long you were out there. And so the guy I had video of the man pulling or had him on his back, taking this Cuban man out of the jungle, and he set him down on that concrete like 1 or 2 minutes before this video started. And this Marine that's with us, Carlos Goetz is his name. He said, I'm going to take him to the hospital, which, as Marines do. And he threw him over his shoulder, as Marines do, and walked. There's no hospital there, but there's a clinic. And Doctors Without Borders, people will say bad stuff about them, and I do sometimes too, but they actually do a lot of great work. And one doctor had been out there for a month, and he's the only thing they had to treat this guy. And this is normal. Guys like this is, I mean, it's nothing to see 100 people like this come in one day. That's not only is that nothing, that's absolutely normal, is to see more than 100 like this come in a day. That is completely normal.
I'm guessing he couldn't really walk on his own. Is that why he
couldn't walk at all? I mean, if a tiger was chasing him, he might get a few steps. But I mean, he's on the verge of potentially losing his feet. I mean, he's on the verge of septicemia. You can see his feet. I mean, he's maybe, I've shown some doctors those photos, and they're like, well, he might have some nerve damage. They'd have to look at him. But that's, he's right on the verge of, literally that's life-threatening. It's trench foot that's going a little too far. And they're out there, and Panama is famous for mud, by the way. There's all kinds of mud in the world. And if you're a war correspondent or in the military, especially in the infantry, you need to understand mud. And there's a lot to understand about mud. And the mud in Panama is absolutely famous. For instance, when they were building the canal, which is not far from me now, when they were their shovels, whether they were machine shovels or shovels they used by hand sometime, they would shovel the mud, and then they had to push the mud off of the shovel with another tool. It's really sticky mud. And so they're going through days and days of this with wet feet. And many people get lost out there. The guy that got lost for 22 days, he just came in last week. That's a pretty incredible story. He's an Ecuadorian. His wife had left him a note that she's Cuban. She was running away from him, and she went to the Darien Gap, of all places in the world. Apparently she didn't do her homework. Almost none of these people know it's going to be like this, by the way. Almost everybody we ask says, we had no idea. We thought it was going to be easy. It's amazing, or we didn't realize it was going to be that hard. And so this Cuban lady, she ran away from her Ecuadorian husband. So this will be about 30 days ago, so 35 days ago. She ran away from him. He followed, and he goes into the gap, following her, and he was out there on about his 10th day. He lost the trail. He fell down some terrain, and he couldn't get back out. It was too slippery and steep. So he was stuck in that with no food, and plenty of water because it rains like crazy here. So he was stuck down there for 5 more days. That's 15 days now he's been in the jungle. Some Haitians came along, pulled him out. He had no food. He said they gave him some food, sat down with him for a day, and then the Haitians kept going. And then he finally made it out after another week. So after 22 days, he made it. This is a normal type of story. Any one of these stories is like Into the Wild epic movie, but it's happening moment by moment. There's people out there right now. I would say 20% or so of the people coming through are children. Many of those are less than 1 year old. I think there's a child in that photo right there, isn't there? Is there a child in that?
It looks like a child right there. Couple, actually.
Oh, yeah. And a lot of them there's pregnant women coming through because they're pregnant, and actually some of them survive. And so they're told that if they come, by the way, last year and the years before, pregnant women and small children weren't being taken through. And certainly not in these numbers, very tiny, very few at all, not pregnant women at all. But they're being told that if you're pregnant or you've got a child, then you've got the golden ticket. So we believe some of the children are kidnapped. We're working on that, as is the Panamanian government. Well, that's an interesting story for the future, but we're all over that. And so anyway,
so all of these people are real fast, Michael.
Yeah.
Hang on real fast. This is a line of people getting on the bus who have made it through and then they're going somewhere else, or what's going on in this video?
Yeah. Okay. These are the people that have come through the Darien Gap, and then they came to Bajo Chiquito, which is where that village is with the Cuban guy. And then from Bajo Chiquito, they get on canoes, and they go for several hours downriver, which we were just on, and one of their canoes tipped over. One of their canoes, one of ours were fine. We had 2 canoes, and one of their canoes actually tipped over and almost drowned 3 of them. They're okay. The Indians saved them. It's Imbra Indians. These are dugout canoes, the kind where they chop the tree down and make a canoe where it lands and then sail off in it, right? So
do you have any of this on your Patreon page? Because I can pull it up.
Oh yeah, I've got video up there of 19. That's Representative Tom Tiffany right there. He's getting in our canoes, and there's the Marine right behind him who picked up that Cuban. That took us 3 hours to go up the river, and then 20 of their canoes came by us going downstream. We got 19 on video, and then one of them tipped over. We didn't see the tip over. That happened after we passed them. But so yeah. That was our plane trip on Saturday. So
I remember seeing a video that you sent me, which I guess I'm gonna. Oh, and here maybe we should show this too, right? This is what you're. Okay.
Yeah.
So we're talking about this area here.
Actually, above that blue dot, above that, right about there. That's about where right there, where your icon is. That's where they come out roughly, almost a tiny bit away from that to the left at Bajo Chiquito. And so that's where we went 3.5 hours upstream on dugout canoes. And, when the congressman came and said, you got to wear river shoes, I wear keys, and because we may have to push the boats and that sort of thing. Luckily, we didn't have to push the boat. Sometimes when I go out there, you got to get out and push the boat. Sorry, I didn't shave because, I'm a jungle boy. And so, I spent a lot of time out there with the Indians. At first, I couldn't get out there because the government wouldn't let me out. And so I did what I do in every country. I'm like, well, who lives here? And it was the Indians. And so it took me a couple of months and networking with the Indians and out in a lot of their villages. And I mean, these are guys who still hunt with poison darts and blowguns and that sort of thing. And, they're out there swimming naked in the rivers, and I go out there with them too, bathe, because you get dirty out there. I mean, it's the jungle. And so, they're Imbra and Wunan Indians and also Kuna Indians. And so that's the main 3 groups of Indians down there, because the the migrants walk through Indian reservations, and so the it's called the Imbarak Wunan Comarca, which means reservation. So I got to know the Indians. It took a long time, but I like the Indians. They're pretty cool, actually. They remind me of like my grandparents. You know, they can do anything, climb any tree, and you won't believe those Indian kids. They do the stuff that, you know, that makes boys into boy. I mean, you see those trees in there? They'll climb up a
Yep.
tree twice. Those children, like 10 years old, will be up in a tree twice. That canoe right there. That's the one. That canoe. That's the one that flipped over. It flipped over.
So this is on your YouTube channel, and I should just tell everybody that I'll have links for all of your stuff in the description of the video so that they can go check out all your work if they haven't heard about you yet. And if you're watching this on one of my other platforms and not YouTube, thank you for doing that. But if you're watching this on YouTube, consider moving to one of those other platforms, and those links are also in the description because I don't know, Michael, have you faced any censorship of your work? Because I've certainly faced it on mine.
Oh, yeah. Oh, for years. You know, like for instance, Facebook has tried my page since 2014, and then oh, good Lord, every people like you and me, you already know what happens.
Yeah,
so a lot, yes.
It's this. So real fast back to this video. So this again is explain where we are specifically again, and then but these are all people who are trying to get to the United States. Is that or somewhere else? I don't know. Where are these people headed?
Right. That's right. They're on Rio Turquesa, which you'll be lucky to find that on the Google Earth, but it's out there. So this is this river runs into into well, anyway, long story short, this village is this river is coming out of the Darien Gap, and it goes right by the village of Bajo Chiquito that I talked about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So that village is the first village that migrants come to. They then stay in that village for some period of time. It can be just one day, it can be weeks actually. And then after that, they pay to get in these boats, about $40 each. And so that holds about 15 people. They don't count the children. These 20 canoes that went by us, you can see 19 in this video. There was another one that went on the right side we didn't catch. There was at least 300 people that went by us, right? So, and that was just one load on that day. When we got to the village, Bajo Chiquito, because we were still going upstream when they passed us, there was about 200 migrants still in the village. And then that's when that Cuban guy came in being carried. And then right after him was another guy being carried. And then it just hit. I mean, the village, as soon as these guys are gone, they're going to be replaced by more. And the reason that there's so many now is because the Biden policy actually just opened door. And they'll tell you that this is their chance. They're making a run for the gold. And a lot of them die. These canoes, one of the major ways they die is actually drowning, not just by the canoes, but by these flash floods are epic. Even the Imbra Indians out there, they're like, and they're Indians, you know, they've been out there forever. Even they don't get a lot of warning. One of the things I was worried about taking the congressman up there, because I'm on a boat with congressmen right now. I'm on one of these boats, right? And so, and I was worried that we would get a flash flood, because if you look on the side of the river there, you can see, if you were to look closely, there was just a flash flood in the last couple of days, and it really wrecked a lot of the side of the river. And so what would have happened if we got a flash flood that day, which is a pretty high chance, we were going to have to stay in the jungle for, you know, we might have to stay out there all night. And which is fine. I mean, that's cool. You know, we're ready for that. And Tom Tiffany's a dairy farmer. He can handle it. And so, but that's what they deal with. These guys, they walk through that jungle, and not only do they have to face the jungle and the centipedes, and a lot of them actually die of snake bites. Actually, believe it or not, I mean, in the United States, not many people die of snake bites, but a lot of them out here do. And in some countries, like tons of people die of snake bites, like India, where I've spent a year. I mean, it's like unbelievable. But the bottom line is all the threats that they face, and then there's the robbers out there. They say all the light-skinned women get raped, all the pretty girls get raped, they say, and so most of the Cubans get raped, many of the Haitians get raped, and all the women that they like, they all get raped. And so everybody gets robbed. Some of them do come out with their cell phones, though. Some don't. Some are coming through a different route, and I could go on about that for hours, because there's a program called control flow, and then there's people trying to escape that. That's another subject. But the bottom line is if you come through that long route through the Darien Gap, chances of getting raped are upwards of 90%. And also they get murdered a lot. And so and robbed, and you're going to end up being without food. And so one guy just last week, on the 27th actually of May, when we had the congressman out there, he said, one man said he counted 16 bodies on his trip. He was actually counting. He said 16 dead people that he actually saw. But a lot of them just are swept away. Like the people from Senegal, 20 of them came through and 10 of them died.
Yeah, I think more than anything, what I get from your work is just how incredibly dangerous this is, that we usually see on mainstream news like the end of it, like walking maybe across the border in Mexico into Texas or something. But you just don't see this kind of stuff on average, watching my old industry of TV news. That's for sure. I know we gotta wrap it up, even though we could, I'm sure, sit here and talk for hours, and I hope you'll come back on again, Michael. I guess my final question for you is, what do you think, as you watch, and I don't know, maybe you don't watch it, but if you are consuming any of the mainstream coverage of the stuff that you're seeing firsthand, the stuff coming out of New York City or LA, Washington, DC, and you're like, what are outlets getting right, and what are they getting wrong? And if you want to be a better consumer of this news, and you want to understand better what's going on, what should you do?
There are some good journalists out there, but there's not many good ships to be on. That's like saying there's some great sailors, but you can't find a good Navy, right? I mean, it's just, that's why I went to Iraq to begin with in 2004. I didn't believe mainstream media already. And that's why I went to Afghanistan. And that's why I was so far ahead of everybody, a year and a half of calling the Iraq Civil War. And I got a lot of flack for it. Same in Afghanistan. I have perpetually been ahead. That's why I picked up millions of readers, because I'm very accurate. I'm very cautious. I spend a lot of time on the ground, as the New York Times and U.S. Army both said. I spent more time in combat than any war correspondent in those wars. And that would be by not by 10%. That would be like by factors, right? I mean, I was out there getting the atmospherics of what's going on. What's the mood of the people? How well are they fighting? The ones who are fighting, how well are our people doing? That sort of thing. That's what I do. I mean, I go to see where it's at. And that way, when I do talk with generals or I talk with whomever, they can't bullshit me. It's very difficult. It's very difficult. I was just asked to go to Afghanistan the other day, and I declined. I'm done with Afghanistan because I've seen us fight the same war year after year after year and never change what we're doing, and never seem to grow a brain about it. So right now, the proximate threat to the United States are many, and they don't include Afghanistan. Afghanistan has got $2 trillion worth of minerals we'd like, and there's other issues there. Of course, there's quite a few others. But a much larger and proximate threat is this migration. I just saw Europe put a gun to its own head. It's unbelievable. I lived in Europe for 6 years. I've been all over that place. As soon as they open the borders, some fish just don't mix well in the same aquarium. They're filling their aquarium with fish that are not like them, and they have different ways and different cultures, and they are going to go eventually to war. That's just the way it's going to go. I mean, you can see it's like launching an artillery shot, and the trajectory, and about where it's going to land. And that's what's happening now with us. It's clear that this is unfettered immigration that is going to have permanent effects on the United States, and they will not be anything that benefits the long-term security of the United States or of the world. Because when the United States becomes unstable, which we're heading that direction very quickly, Japan is at risk from TCP. I've written 3 books about Chinese information war. Unfortunately, they're all in Japanese language, so you can't read them. I spent a lot of time in China, spent a lot of time in Hong Kong and Taiwan and other places researching what's coming at us. And it's a giant asteroid, and we're undermining our strength to stand up to this thing. We must close the borders, but as you can see, it's not happening. I'm not against immigration at all. In fact, I've been saying I go on with Gordon Chang almost every week and have for, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years. Ever since the Hong Kongers, the communists kicked me out and took control of Hong Kong, I've been saying we should take 100,000 Hong Kongers right now. They're highly educated. They're family people. They work hard. Hong Kongers are no threat to us. They will add value to the United States. But we're packing in a lot of people, even while unemployment is skyrocketing. Everything I see now, there are certain things I look for, like when a doctor walks into a room, say an oncologist, and he's checking the patient for cancer. I know how to do the same things when it comes to war. I know what to look for. There are specific things to look for, to smell for, to sense for, and I'm good at it. And the United States is heading to civil war. It's very clear. And, when I would say that a couple of years ago, it sounded crazy. Now more and more people actually see it. But I can actually describe the reasons, but we'll need, another segment someday. But it's the same reasons that I saw in Iraq and the same reasons that I saw in Afghanistan. And it's the same reasons why I told Thailand, no, you're in civil unrest. You're not in civil war. There is a very big difference. There's things. So it's the difference between a bump and a malignant bump, right? There are differences, but what we're going into in the United States is clear civil war. And this unfettered migration is we're just adding radiation to the bump.
All right, Michael, I appreciate your thoughts and the perspective that you can lend. It's definitely different than what many of us are seeing, on our just average corporate news. And I know there may be people watching who disagree with what you're saying.
They should come out with me.
Say what?
They should come out with me.
Well, that's exactly what yeah. I mean, that's kind of my point on my channel is to offer perspectives that, are often not allowed out there for people to hear and see. And so that people can, hey, even if, you say, oh, come on, Michael, that's overkill, close the borders, that's xenophobic or whatever. At least you walk away with a better perspective on what's going on behind the scenes that you're not necessarily seeing, the dangers that you talked about today. Oftentimes I don't think we hear about, like you were talking about, rape and the children that are going through. Are they kidnapped? Like all these things that go along with not keeping tabs on the movement of people, and that, in an effort to help folks, if you don't take into account the things you're seeing, you may end up putting people in very grave danger. And so that's why I just appreciate the perspective that you share.
Children are dying there right now.
Yeah. And I mean, it's just, again, too, as you were talking earlier, being silenced on social media, I try to bring in voices that are voices that make the establishment of whatever uncomfortable. And that way, like I said, if there are people who are like, I don't like what that guy said. Well, if you never listen to somebody like you, then your own perspective of disagreement is a very shallow one, in my opinion. So I appreciate your taking the time to talk with us. And I hope you'll come back on in the future as you're working on other stuff.
I want to be clear. I'm not anti-migration. And keep in mind, I have spent approximately 30 years of my life in other countries. It's hard to accuse me of xenophobia and make it stick for anybody that knows my work. I mean, I'm constantly helping people, for instance, Hong Kongers and others, and from many countries. I've helped Iraqis who were wounded, get to the United States and that sort of thing. So I'm absolutely not against migration, but I do know some of the indicators of war, and we are setting ourselves up, even as our economy goes into the doldrums and many other things. We're just adding fuel to the fire, and it's really going to have terrible consequences if we don't do something immediately.
All right. Well, I do appreciate it, Michael. Again, everybody, go check out Michael Yan's work, and I'm sure we'll see you in the near future. Stay safe.
Thanks, Allison.